Welcome to the first episode of a series I'm starting in which I'll be researching every mainline Final Fantasy game and looking into the hardest boss or fight within that entry, specifically in the context of speedrunning. I'll be looking at multiple categories and platforms if applicable too, as most games have variations between versions and certain categories or versions may not fight the same bosses. Each video will focus on a single game. We'll look into what makes the fight difficult and what speedrunners do to tackle it. Additionally, if a version of the game or category has a different hardest fight, we'll look into why that is. This is looking to be a pretty large group effort, as my personal experience and knowledge primarily is for Final Fantasy VII through to X-2, and even within those games, I haven't run every category, so I'll be relying on various community members who have all offered their time and knowledge to help me with this series. I'll be including socials and stream links in the description, and giving them shoutouts throughout the series. Please show them support if you enjoy any of these games and speedruns and the videos produced by their efforts. With all that said though, let's start from the beginning and look at the hardest boss in the speedrun of the series debut, Final Fantasy I. Final Fantasy I probably has the most amount of re-releases in the series, with each version being very distinct from one another, especially visually. One interesting aspect about Final Fantasy I is that you commit to your classes at the start of the game and are unable to change those classes freely like later entries. The strategies used and the classes selected will go hand in hand when it comes to speedrunning. Red mages and white mages will usually be selected when the strategies call for more defensive play, whereas black mages and monks are typically used in more high-risk, high-reward parties. Starting with the NES version, high-level runners will opt for 2 warriors and 2 black mages, and kill off 1 black mage early into the run to split the EXP 3 ways instead of 4, and save gil by only needing to purchase equipment for 3 characters. Strategically killing off a party member is pretty common in JRPG speedruns, however it's not so common to be something that's done for nearly the entire game. In the NES speedrun, the run isn't even really considered as having started until Lich is defeated. Lich has a 75% chance to cast a spell from a list in a fixed order, and a 25% chance to do a physical attack. His opening spell will always be Ice 2. Runners arrive to the fight with 2 casts of Fire 2 on their black mage ready to go, and are just about praying to either outspeed Ice 2, survive it, or roll the 16.6% chance that the physical attack targets one of the knights instead of the black mage. This allows the black mage to get at least 1 cast of Fire 2 for big damage. Warriors can swing with their regular attack, but without getting a critical hit, the damage is pitiful compared to the mage. Every time Lich proceeds to pull from his spellbook, the fight gets worse and worse. After Ice 2, he casts Sleep 2, so one character is probably out of commission from there. And after that, he casts Fast, so nobody's outspeeding him anymore. Following that, he casts Lightning 2 for further damage. So if Lich pulls from his spellbook 4 times in a fight, it's just about game over, and keep in mind that the spellbook is the far more likely of his 2 options. If you've somehow survived Lightning 2, you'll be lucky to have 1 party member left. Lich will either attack and kill that party member, or cast Hold, stopping the target from taking action. Regardless of if Hold hits or whiffs, his follow-ups are either Fire 2 or an attack, both of which definitely resulting in a game over. The Final Fantasy I NES speedrun doesn't really have any skill in execution, it's really just running the numbers and hoping for the best. You can even see Jeez here, sporting the data of his runs on stream. Given that the odds of the Lich fight are just so unfavourable for the runner, we can comfortably say it's the hardest boss in the Final Fantasy I NES speedrun. Unfortunately for Game Boy Advance, PlayStation Portable, and Pixel Remaster speedrunners, the hardest fight is the run's grand finale, Chaos. Starting with the PSP version, speedrunners will take advantage of a glitch which allows weapons and armor to be equipped in unintended ways. Weapons will all feature a weapon ID, and armor an armor ID. Using this glitch, a weapon can be equipped onto an armor slot and act as a piece of armor with a corresponding ID. For example, a rune axe can be equipped onto an armor slot and be treated as a crystal helm. Furthermore, this glitch allows a player to equip anything onto any character, regardless of if their class is compatible with that equipment. For PSP speedrunners, they can let the equipment glitch do a lot of the heavy lifting for their defense, and none of the fights are particularly difficult. This isn't the case for Chaos though. With the favoured party setup being 2 melee attackers and 2 mages, runners are very much trying to execute an awkward middle ground. One part of the strategy is to boost the stats of the attackers with items and spells, while the other part is to deal damage. Chaos' spell rotation works similar to the NES version, with spells being cast in a fixed order, but it's still chance-based as to whether or not he'll pull from that spellbook. While not as overtly chance-based as the NES version, the PSP version of Chaos will still give runners a really hard time. In this series, I want to try and look at each fight in a vacuum, ignoring the context of the run. so a fight's position in a run won't factor into its difficulty. A later fight is not necessarily harder, but it really doesn't help that most Final Fantasy I runners really don't get to relax until the screen flashes and that boss death animation starts. The Game Boy Advance fight is somewhat similar, but runners need to take on Chaos without the equipment glitch on their side. While the general strategy is similar, the party makeup has changed to accommodate the version differences present in this version. Runners spend the first few turns buffing the monk's health, speed, and attack, and praying that other party members don't die too early. Once the monk is buffed enough, runners will need to balance their damage with healing items rather than healing magic, as the favoured spellcasters in this version of the speedrun are red mages, who have weaker healing spells than their white mage counterparts. Next, we'll look at the most recent version of Final Fantasy I, the Pixel Remaster. In this version, enemies don't cast spells in a fixed order like the previous versions discussed so far, so runners are not able to anticipate what Chaos will cast from his wide pool of strong magic. Chaos opening with haste is an extremely scary opener, as his already nasty physical attack will deal more damage and just about guaranteeing a kill on its target. The player would also have no chance to get a turn in before Chaos. Additionally, if the runner's monk dies, he'll need to be rebuffed after being revived, which lowers the runner's odds of victory further. Chaos also has a 2% chance of casting Curaja, fully healing as well. This is a looming threat throughout the entire fight. For the Pixel Remaster, high-level runners will keep a party member petrified rather than KO'd, as this allows certain attacks and spells to still target them. Unlike later entries in the series where an attack against a petrified target shatters them, attacks on a petrified target here will simply miss. This dilutes your pool of potential targets and skews the odds slightly more in favour of the runner. It's interesting to see that while the most difficult fight across all three of these versions is Chaos, and the strategy is mostly the same, the version differences require speedrunners to take significantly different measures to execute that strategy. So far though, we've only looked at fights that you can't avoid in the any percent route. However, most Final Fantasy games on speedrun.com will feature a completionist category, typically all bosses or 100% completion. The Game Boy Advance and PSP versions both have an all bosses category. For the Game Boy Advance version, Shinryu is far and away the hardest fight, and the main reason that the favoured party for the speedrun contains 2 white mages. Shinryu's pool of attacks is primarily made up of extremely high level magic that targets the whole party, and with magic resistance only coming from level ups and the ribbon equip, speedrunners are in a tough spot since grinding for levels isn't really an option. The strategy is to use Giant's Tonics to raise the party's max health for this battle so that they can actually survive Shinryu's turns, and then various offensive stat boost items and spells are used on the knight for the first few turns to ensure that their speed and damage stats will be able to keep up. Both white mages will then repeatedly cast Healga, a full party heal that, only with 2 white mages, can barely maintain the party's health from the damage Shinryu is dealing, except for Flare, which barely outpaces your healing if cast multiple times in a row. Unfortunately, because speedrunners can't predict exactly what Shinryu will use, you need to commit your mages to heals that may be wasted on a single target attack. This can cause MP issues if your knight has some unfortunate damage rolls, and very much puts a turn limit on this fight, since there's no room to spend a turn restoring MP. Once the knight is ready, runners will attack Shinryu down to 0 health, while the red mages continue to spam stat buffs and the white mages spam their heals. Heading over to PSP and the Omega fight, it's very similar to Shinryu in a way, but the damage is physical, not magic. With the equipment glitch, the setup for this fight takes significantly less time, and the defensive advantage affords PSP runners the opportunity to add some ninjas to the party. This doesn't make the Omega fight easy by any means though. Most of the abilities that Omega can cast will give a lot of trouble to runners early in the fight, and will almost certainly game over the party with a bit of poor luck on the runner's side, even after the buffs have been set up and the player is in their groove of attacks and heals. Much like the Shinryu fight though, after the setup phase, runners will attack Omega down to 0 health, doing their best to survive the huge damage output. While similar in strategy, these two fights are typically considered the hardest in the Final Fantasy I all bosses run, regardless of platform. Of course, certain people may find these bosses more or less difficult, so we're trying to be pretty general when it's not so clear. Whether you're a fellow speedrunner, a completionist, a casual player, or some other kind of challenge runner, I'd love to know what bosses or fights gave you the most trouble. I'm going to try and post a video of this series every 1 or 2 weeks, and at the end, do an honourable mention segment for bosses in the series that I didn't cover. If you'd like to be featured, leave a comment and let me know what Final Fantasy I boss you found to be the most difficult. Thank you to these runners for taking the time out of their day to share their valuable insight and help with researching this video. Their socials and stream links will be in the video description, as well as my own. Stay tuned, as up next will be Final Fantasy II. Thank you for watching.